Rachel Reeves at her first IMF as Chancellor, meeting Janet Yellen, the most powerful finance minister in the world today. She's keen to talk up the UK, as well as her own brand as being prudent, and she's hoping financial markets buy it. Next week she unveils Labour's first budget in 14 years, and today she tried to buy herself a bit more freedom by changing the fiscal rules to make that historic budget count.
This is a humiliation, Chancellor.
It's just 2 years since Kwasi Kwarteng rushed home from his first and last IMF to be sacked. Labour is still haunted by the disaster of his and Liz Truss's budget.
I will remain as Prime Minister until a successor has been chosen. Thank you.
Tens of billions of pounds in tax cuts unchecked by the OBR saw financial market confidence collapse and interest rates soar.
So it only takes 2 weeks?
That helped convince Reeves and Starmer that voters wanted to be sure Labour wouldn't make the same mistakes. So they tied themselves in knots to debt rules and promises not to raise key taxes. But the reality is always different to how you picture things. And today, the Chancellor said she was determined to boost the economy, encourage investment and repair public services. Her gamble is that changing the fiscal rules will allow her to do that, and that markets will be convinced enough that she can be trusted.
And Helia joins us now from Washington. Helia, what exactly did Rachel Reeves announce today then?
Well, Kieran, there's been months and months of speculation that the Chancellor was going to change the fiscal rules. And today, here in Washington, she made it official. She told me and a group of other UK journalists that the constraints on UK borrowing were going to be relaxed. Now, that allows her to borrow up to £50 billion extra. And she said the choice was stark, either more investment on one side or on the other side, decline.
And the background to all this, isn't it, is those fiscal rules. Just remind us what they are and why Rachel Reeves considers them so important.
I mean, bluntly, Kieran, it's how the government demonstrates to the markets that they're not going to be profligate, that there are some kind of limit. The first fiscal rule is all about day-to-day spending being in balance. That's why the government says that they're going to have to raise taxes in the budget to pay for things like nurses and teachers. And that rule stays. It's the second rule, the one that governs how much you borrow to invest, that's going to get a dramatic rewrite. They're going to make the balance sheet, the government balance sheet, bigger. The bigger the balance sheet, the more you can borrow. The question, and of course the risk, is whether markets buy this narrative. Already this morning, there was a slight wobble in financial markets. And I think Labour hope that in an environment where interest rates are coming down, possibly the markets, possibly these bond vigilantes are a bit more relaxed. But today, the Shadow Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, said this decision was reckless and that it showed Rachel Reeves's contempt both for the British public and for Parliament. I sat down earlier with the Chancellor and asked her why changing these rules mattered.
I'll be setting out 2 fiscal rules at the budget next week. The first is the stability rule to pay for data spending through tax receipts. That was something that the previous government weren't even trying to do, let alone able to meet. That's really important because that's about the sustainability of the public finances.
But what about the other one?
Rule, the second rule, the investment rule, will see debt fall as a share of GDP. But I can confirm today that we'll be changing the way that the government measures debt, because I've listened to what the International Monetary Fund have said about the need to free up resource for investing in capital.
But last week when we spoke, you said it was a balancing act. You know, aren't you taking a massive risk on the reaction of financial markets? I mean, this morning, gilt yields have already reacted negatively.
On the investment rule, we'll put guardrails in place to ensure that every pound of taxpayers' money, government money that is invested, delivers a return for taxpayers. And we will have the National Audit Office and the OBR involved in validating those investments to ensure that we are getting good value for money. But there's a decision to be made about whether you want to embrace decline, as the Conservatives did, with public sector net investment as a share of our economy declining rapidly during the course of this Parliament, that was their plan, or whether you want to embrace the huge opportunities there are. I'm determined to get our share of investment and the good jobs that come with it.
No one's disputing the vision, but it is risky. At the moment, our debt interest bill is more than the entire Department of Defence, more than Department of Education. Is this a guarantee that you think our borrowing costs will not go up if you borrow an extra £50 billion?
Well, we'll set out the numbers, and of course we will leave
It's a risk,
sufficient
though.
headroom.
It's a risk.
Well, the risk is carrying on the path that we are on, which has seen debt increase over the last 14 years. If we continue on this path that we are on today, we'll see continued declines in living standards, and we will continue to fail to realise our potential.
And that's a bigger risk than the
making,
financial market risk, just definitively.
Well, it's really important that when financial markets see what we're setting out next week, they see that debt is on a downward trajectory as a share of our economy, that we're getting a grip of day-to-day spending by funding it through tax receipts, and that there are guardrails around the investments that will be permitted.
Let's talk about other opportunities. The IFS says that this could be the biggest tax-raising budget since Dennis Healey. Is that a badge of honour for you?
Well, we'll set out our plans in the budget next week, but I was clear in July that the state of the public finances, the £22 billion black hole that we have inherited from the Conservatives, will require difficult decisions on spending, on welfare and taxation. But those decisions are necessary to get our public finances
on the
on a stable
manifesto?
trajectory.
You seem to be saying that you'll stick to the letter of the manifesto, but not to the spirit of the promises that were made to voters. Fiscal drag undoubtedly affects working people, and if you raise national insurance on employers, still raising national insurance, do you worry that people at home will think this is just a political sleight of hand?
When people see the budget next week, I hope they will see that I've done everything in my power to protect the living standards of ordinary working people, that we're not taking money out of their pay packets. My ambition for Britain has never burned as bright as it does today. There are huge opportunities, and I'm determined that this is a government that works with business to realise that potential for Britain.
What do you say to Lord Mervyn King, who's complained you should stop mentioning you're the first female Chancellor? Does that sound like out-of-date sexism to you?
I'm really proud to be the first female Chancellor. In 800 years, a woman has never delivered a budget or had the role of Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now, before I became a politician, I worked as an economist at the Bank of England. I have huge respect for Mervyn King.
Does he get a free pass on sexist comments like that?
Look, Mervyn is welcome to say what he wants, but I am really proud, and I hope that a woman delivering the budget sends a signal to young women and girls across our country that there is no ceiling on what they can achieve, and there should be no ceiling on their ambitions. And I'm proud to have finally smashed this glass ceiling.
And I just want to ask you on cost of living. At food banks, there are mothers who worry about the two-child benefit cap, and there are pensioners who worry about heating their homes. When will their lives get better?
Well, I hope that what they'll see in the budget next week is that I'm doing everything in my power, even in these difficult circumstances, to protect working people and to improve living standards, but also crucially, and I know that families and older people rely on our NHS more than most, that we will begin to fix our NHS to bring down waiting times.
Thank you very much, Chancellor.
Thank you.
Well, one thing that helped propel Labour into power was the cost of living crisis, and millions of households under financial strain will now be looking to see what Rachel Reeves' big first budget will do about it. And while Labour's come under fire within its own ranks over levels of support for children in poverty and pensioners struggling this winter, more broadly, households across the UK are facing a stark reality, as our fact-check team has been finding out. Because while inflation has fallen to its lowest level in more than 3 years, the prices of many household essentials are still way higher than they were, as you'll see when we compare prices versus earnings. Now, this baseline you're going to see represents prices and earnings at the start of 2021, before the cost of living began to rocket. And when something moves above this line, it means it's increased 10, 20%, and so on. And when we do earnings, what you see from 2021 to August this year, they do go up by 21%. But now let's do some big household expenses. The cost of food at the shops rising higher and never coming back down. Food prices nearly a third higher, 31% in August than they were at the start of 2021. Energy bills also rising way higher than wages, up a massive 132% by October 2022. They've fallen since, but are still 55% higher than they were at the start of 2021. Now, separate analysis by poverty charity the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, shared exclusively with this programme, gives more detail about the financial strain people are under. Households with a mortgage worse off because their housing costs are, on average, an extra £2,200 a year higher now than they were 5 years ago in October 2019. Working age households claiming benefits, they are £690 a year worse off than 5 years ago. And households with one or more disabled person, they are £190 worse off per year. All of this crucial background to Labour's first budget, with people struggling across society, as our Home Affairs correspondent Andy Davis has been finding out in one community in Cornwall.
At the beginning of every week, in the crypt in St Andrew's Church in Redruth, they offer free cooked breakfasts. It's a simple ritual in a warm room, but essential, we're told, by many we meet here.
How important is this for you on a Monday morning?
Oh, very important to a lot of people, yes, especially the old age pensioners, and a lot of the boys here are homeless as well, so, you know, it's a lifeline for them, really.
How are you finding cost of living at the moment?
Tough. Yeah, it's tough, isn't it?
Can you tell me what it feels like to be able to come into a place like this and get a cooked breakfast for free?
Brilliant, it's lovely, and my kids love it as well.
Roxy Bolton is a single parent of 5. She's living in emergency accommodation and struggling to make the benefits she receives cover her bills.
What are you worried about spending money on?
The fresh produce is more expensive than anything else, which is really annoying because I like to feed my children lots of fruit and vegetables, and that's the most expensive thing. Frozen food, you can go into Iceland and get a pizza for 99p, but I don't want to feed my kids pizza every day. I want to feed them nutritious meals every day.
When the Labour government came in, we had great expectations for improvement.
It didn't materialise.
And instead of that there, it's got worse. I thought for a start, I voted for a government that socially looks after the people.
They would say you've got to give them a bit of time. Give them a bit of time.
Yeah, I know.
They didn't take long to pull away the winter fuel allowance, did they? They did it within about 2 weeks, I do remember.
A policy which directly impacts one of the volunteers here, Mary Harris. She just misses out qualifying.
How much of a difference will that make to you, losing the winter fuel payment?
Well, I just won't be able to have my heating on so much. I mean, I don't have it on a lot now, but come the winter, then I should just be wrapped in a blanket.
It is a county wrapped in glorious coastline, but one harbouring pockets of deep inequalities. And for parts of Britain, such as here in Portreath, dependence on seasonal work, as this chef tells me, comes fraught with its own challenges.
You know, you want to live down here, but it's very hard to survive. A lot of big firms down here don't want to go past 0-hour contracts, don't want to pay people at the off-season, so you'll get 40, 50 hours in the summertime. Come winter, you're down to 20, 25 hours.
I think people don't realise what it's really like to live here. It's very beautiful to visit, and it is beautiful. But the house prices, rent prices are crazy compared to the wages.
4 miles away in Camborne, in another church hall,
1, 2,
we meet young parents like Brooke Perry. She works part-time, her partner full-time, and yet she says,
We're struggling, and for the wage that he's on, we shouldn't be struggling considering we're only renting a 2-bed flat. Pretty much every month it's just paying the food, shopping and the bills and everything, and after that there's not really a lot left. Yeah, I would 100% say that this is more difficult than I ever imagined it being.
We've got a budget coming up. What would you like to see from this budget?
I think they should change the 2-child benefit cap. That would make quite a difference to a lot of families, I think.
And you have 3 children, so you're directly impacted.
Yes. And there are people worse off than myself, so I appreciate that makes quite a difference.
Ben Quick, who works part-time, is a teacher, so is his wife. Their mortgage costs went up over £400 a month, he says, after their fixed rate ended.
As teachers, we feel like we should be regarded as having a professional salary, and 2 of us are working, so how other families locally, where the average salary around this area is about 20,000, how they're surviving, I'm not really sure, because we struggle to break even on a reasonably good salary.
Survival for some comes in the shape still of Britain's ubiquitous food banks. Just up the road in Camborne, again in a church, a small child quietly helps his parents gather up tins of donated food. The factors driving such demand, complex and varied. In Levi Lee's case, a mother of 4 and part-time waitress, it involves problems with universal credit payments.
Are you finding it as hard now as it was a year ago, or harder? Or?
No, harder. So much harder. Because everything's going up, wages then go up, but then on top of that, everything goes up again. So it's hard to keep up with the rising cost of everything. It's just, a struggle, real struggle.
And your children, you've got 4 children?
Got 4 children, so, which, again, they grow so quick. I don't know how to put clothes on their backs when there's not enough coming in. It's, difficult.
In its manifesto, Labour pledged an end to such mass dependence on emergency food parcels, calling it a moral scar on our society. Where will that aim now sit within next week's budget, along with all the other myriad demands of those still finding it hard to make ends meet? Among them voters in constituencies like this who ousted the Tories for Labour on the promise of meaningful change.